Now we come to part 2 of our little discussion about the section in Numbers chapter 5 that liberals are stating prove that God supports abortion. And the tweet that was sent to me by the fellow that refers to himself at Church of Inquiry. So we'll take a look once again at what he has to say here. He lists, again, 6 different translations of the Bible. And of those, 2 of them use the word miscarriage or miscarry. Now, the one that he really leans on the most is the NIV, or New International Version. That one is extremely popular, and rightfully so, I have to say. And the other one is the Common English Bible, which is not nearly so popular, and there are reasons for that too, but I won't go into those here. Either way, of the 6, only 2 of them refer to the term miscarriage or miscarry. All of the rest have different terms, like your womb will discharge from the NRSV. You've got the NIRV that says the body unable to have children. Another womb will shrivel from the New Living Translation, and the CSB, which says womb to shrivel. None of those other ones mean miscarriage. Okay? Now, let's have a talk at this point about the different types of translations of the Bible. There are multiple different kinds of translations of the Bible, and they all sit on a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, you have word for word. And the word for word is exactly that. Okay. The Bible, again, was written in 3 different languages, primarily Hebrew and Greek, and a little bit in Aramaic. The Old Testament was primarily Hebrew and a little bit of Aramaic, and then the New Testament, which was written in Greek. Okay. There was also an Old Testament written in Greek, but that was a lot later, called the Septuagint. At any rate, a word-for-word translation is you are trying to translate the Hebrew and the Greek and the Aramaic as close as possible to exactly the way it was written. This is especially difficult for Hebrew, okay, because Hebrew is technically an Eastern language, and Eastern and Western concepts, do not normally have equations per se. So it's a little bit tougher in Hebrew. Whereas Greek, it's a little bit easier. Not much, because Greek tends to be a lot more of an expressive language than is English. English, we have one word for love. In Greek, there's like 5 or 6 different words for love, depending on the type of love that we're talking about. So Greek tends to be a lot more of an expressive language than English. So there's also a little bit of trouble translating there. But the word for word tries to get the right words and as close as possible in the right sequence, which also is a bit of a problem in Hebrew, because Eastern languages don't have the same sequence that English does as well. And then on the other end of the spectrum is thought for thought. And thought for thought is exactly that. It's just kind of paraphrasing. This is what they meant. And then you've got ones that are in between, which are like, we're just kind of, we're kind of walking the middle of the road, doing a little bit of both, and that's where the NIV sits. The NIV sits a little bit closer to the thought for thought side. But as for me, when I do my research for my sermons, I read multiple different translations so that I get a more multifaceted view of the text that I am looking at. However, I always stay anchored to the original languages. Okay? The version that I use the most when I'm doing research, the version that I use the most is the New American Standard Bible. And the NASB is pretty much the most accurate Bible translation you can get. There's other ones that are like literal translations, which are they're very difficult to read because they are word for word placement and everything, and it's very difficult to read. And then you've got the Interlinear Bible, which I'm not overly familiar with. But the Interlinear Bible is supposed to be, even more accurate than the NASB. Now, I will read the NIV. I really like the NIV. I think the NIV is a fantastic translation. I got nothing against it. And I like the CSB, which is also a very good translation, but it's closer to thought for thought. But at any rate, this guy is using the NIV, and the reason he's using the NIV, and he didn't go back to the Hebrew. No, what he did was he went to the translation that fits his agenda. I don't have an agenda when I'm looking at the Bible. When I'm looking at the Bible, I want to know what the Bible says. Because what the Bible says is right. So I want to know what the Bible says, and I want to know if I'm getting it right, if I'm reading it right, which is why I read multiple translations, I read multiple commentaries, so that I make sure I get it right. So this guy has an agenda. And there's a lot of preachers out there that have an agenda. And they do exactly this kind of thing that this guy is doing. They pick the version of the Bible that backs their agenda. Even if they usually use one version of the Bible regularly, if that version doesn't say what they want it to say, they'll pick another version just so that it says what they want it to say. And that's dangerous. And I disagree with that very much. And there are a lot of preachers who do that. I do not. I disagree with that practice. At any rate, excuse me, this guy used a version that is not, or that fits his agenda. Now, here we'll look at the Bible translation continuum real quick. And you'll see. Interlinear, way over here on word for word. NASB, which is what I typically use. Then you got the AMP. I use the ESV as well. There's the King James Version, which I use. New King James Version. Like the Net Bible myself as well. I like the CSB Bible also. NRSV, it's okay. I've never used it that much. Then the NIV, which is what this guy is using. And then you go all the way across here to the Message, which is just, I don't even count that as a translation, quite frankly. But, NIV versus NASB, which is what I use. You can see there's a big distance between the two of them here. This is the more accurate side. This is the less accurate side. NASB, which is what I use. NIV way over here, which, no. If it comes down to a comparison between the two, and the NASB does not, I repeat again, does not use the word miscarry. Next, we're actually going to talk about the real Hebrew language and what the actual Hebrew language says. Thanks for listening. Hit the like and subscribe button if you like what you heard, and I will talk to you all later.